Hey everybody, we are now kicking into our first breakout, and this is on slow streets. So that is where you are now. I hope that you all stay on and join us for this session. You know, I was thinking about it, and a year ago, slow streets may not have even been a topic at this summit or at other summits on biking across the country, and now it feels like it is the topic in urban transportation. So I'm really excited about the panelists that we have here today to talk to us about what they've been doing in their cities. Before we get started, let me share with you who you will be hearing from. I'm Giselle Hale, I'm your moderator. I'm a council member in the city of Redwood City, which is one of the cities you'll be hearing about today, though not from me, from our staff. And I'm a big fan of our Slow Streets program, where one of my daughters recently learned how to ride her bike, two-wheeler, for the very first time. I'm also a lifelong cyclist. I didn't even get my driver's license until I was in my 20s because my town of Madison, Wisconsin had such incredible biking infrastructure. So I wanted to get to our panelists. I'm going to go from south to north, and you can see the map of the cities that we're covering. We also included a little bit of information so that you can put your city and your region into context when we go through these examples. So I wanted to start with Laura Cornejo. Laura is the Director of Transportation for the City of Pasadena. She has 17 years of experience in government, and she most recently furthered her city's Complete Streets and a Dial-A-Ride program. Laura shared that the safest place when she was growing up for her to ride her bike was in a local cemetery, which she unfortunately got locked into one night and had to escape by climbing a gate. Welcome, Laura. Then I wanted to introduce Jessica Manzi from my city of Redwood City. Jessica is our transportation manager for the city of Redwood City. She focuses on transportation and development plans and projects that create and maintain a safe, multimodal, and accessible transportation network in order to build a great community. She was previously with the SFMTA. Her biking story is when she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin, West Africa. Mountain bike was her primary mode of transportation, and one of her most memorable trips was a 40K ride in the mountains of the north to visit the town of Bokembe. Pretty cool. Welcome, Jessica. I'd like to introduce you to Noel Pondanchik. Noel is the transportation planner at the City of Oakland, working on the bicycle and pedestrian program, which is amazing. I wish my city had that as a role. She works on the Slow Streets program and other pedestrian-oriented programs and infrastructure implementation. She's also co-lead of the Racial Equity Team's Committee on Data Analytics. It is not all work and no play for Noel. She also loves biking across the New Richmond Bridge and the newish Bay Bridge bike paths. Last but not least, we thought it would be great to get a panelist from outside of California to give us their perspective. So we're looking to the city of Bend, Oregon, where Robin Lynn Lewis is joining us, their transportation engineer. She has worked there for 20 years, and her recent work includes developing plans and guidance for a network of low-stress walking and biking facilities, safe routes to school and parks, and neighborhood street safety programs, which all sound amazing. So now, before we get started, we wanted to better understand who we have in the room today, and for that, I'm going to turn to staff who has a poll. All right, so you see a poll in front of you. We want you to click on, you know what you're doing, you're populating it, great. So we want you to click on your current roles so we get a sense of who we'll be speaking to, and I'm sure that will be of interest to our panelists. It looks like we have a large number of public agency employees, and then some private business and employees and consultants, which is great to have both sectors represented. And then we also have Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee members, which is also wonderful since we know you folks help to shape strategy. And then concerned citizens, fantastic. Great to have you joining us today. I see some students, some fellow elected officials or their staff, welcome, and nonprofit employees. Great. So there are the results that you can all take a look at. So now before we're going to jump into a discussion, but first our panelists were going to each give you a few minutes introduction to the programs they have running in their cities before we have a larger discussion. So let's start with Noel from Oakland.
Hi everyone, thanks Giselle for the introduction. Am I supposed to be able to control the screen now?
I think that somebody's going to advance the slides for you.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so hi everyone. Like Giselle just said, my name is Noelle Poddanchik and I'm a transportation planner on the Bike Ped team on the Slow Streets division at the City of Oakland DOT. Wow, that's a mouthful. And I'm here today to answer a couple questions about our Slow Streets program. Next slide. And so I'm sure most of you here know what slow streets are, but just to get us all on the same page, I'm going to start with a little background on our Oakland Slow Streets program. So we launched on Saturday, April 11th, which is almost 4 months ago now. It's been a while, and it came out of a directive from the mayor's office. Our initial goal was to create more space for comfortable, physically distant walking, wheelchair rolling, jogging, biking, hoverboarding, roller skating, etc., all across the city by closing streets to through traffic using materials like traffic cones, signage, and barriers. And you can see that in like the photo on the left, and also rerouting people using Google and Apple Maps. And I also just want to mention, because it's such an important and timely—
Hey, Noelle, a quick interjection. We're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. You might be covering your microphone. You want to try adjust? I think that's better already. Do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Can you hear me better?
It's still a little bit canny, but if that's what we have, that's what we have.
Okay, sorry about that. Let me know if you want me to repeat anything. Okay.
I think they want you to talk closer to your mic.
Is this better?
That is better. Thanks, Noelle.
Sure. And I just wanted to mention that there's no enforcement component of the program. It's just about encouraging people to slow down. And so those were the initial goals of the Slow Streets program, but it's now been expanded to include Slow Streets Essential Places, which you see a photo of on the right. A little bit about Slow Streets Essential Places. So we heard from many of our partners and our—
Hey, Noelle, unfortunately,
neighborhoods that
unfortunately, it's a bit now. Hey, Noelle, can you hear me? Noelle, it's a little bit worse. We definitely can't hear you now.
You can't? Let me try maybe moving around. Sorry about that.
Right now it's better. I don't know if it's your hands on the computer or the Wi-Fi. I mean, it's always hard to know. Maybe you could remove your headset if it's not too loud in your room.
Is this any better?
That is better. Yeah. Great.
Okay, great. So yeah, a little bit about Slow Streets Essential Services. Slow Streets Essential Services. So we were hearing from people in our East Oakland neighborhoods that it wasn't really meeting— Slow Streets corridors weren't really meeting their needs, and didn't address their real problems of traffic violence and speeding on major arterial streets. So then we came up with Slow Streets Essential Places, a mix of temporary and permanent traffic safety improvements, things like signage, daylighting, pedestrian refuges. All this stuff you see, or pedestrian refuges you see in the photo on the right, things like bulb outs or setting pedestrian signals to recall to enable safer access for residents to access essential services in their neighborhood, which we defined as grocery stores, food distribution sites in public facilities, and COVID testing sites that overlay with the city's high injury network. And then we prioritized which locations to make improvements at based on our geographic equity tool, which uses indicators like race and income. Next slide. So here's just a map of our current Slow Streets network. So we now have 21 Slow Streets corridors and 15 essential places locations. At some point, we began installing Slow Streets only in collaboration with partners like rec centers, senior home walk clubs, or neighborhood groups. So that's why a lot of the routes we added later are a bit smaller. And it's probably our network will probably look like this for a while because we're currently on pause implementing new Slow Streets while we evaluate the program. Next slide. Okay, awesome. That's my introduction. This is my email if you have any follow-up questions, and I'm very excited to hear from other cities and answer questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for hanging with us on the tech issues, and thanks to everybody watching who helped us navigate those as well. So now we're going to flip it over to Laura in Pasadena. Laura.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Let's go ahead and move over onto the next slide. So the city of Pasadena is located roughly about 10 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles. It is what I would call on the larger side of a mid-sized city, smaller side of a large city. The department itself is responsible for, I would say, everything having to do with transportation. We have a transit system. We oversee and manage the city's on-street and garage parking program, traffic engineering, complete streets. And so everything that we do within the department really we approach it from this holistic perspective. Our Slow Streets program really was in response to COVID-19 and what we started seeing out in the city and the neighborhoods and how people were traveling and what outlets they needed to get through the safe at home order. What we saw initially in the first couple of weeks of April was a significant drop in traffic, as I'm sure many other cities saw. It's now roughly at about 60%, but initially it was about less than 75% of what we would normally see. And initially our program, we kind of held off thinking the safer at home order would be short-lived. And when it became very clear to us that this would be the norm for some time, we realized we needed to provide our residents with an outlet for physical activity, emotional well-being. And so that's where our program came to be. You'll see here our goals were to improve safety for local pedestrians and bicyclists, slowing down vehicular traffic, and then really still encouraging social distancing behavior. So we didn't want to implement any programs that encouraged people to congregate. And so if we could move on to the next slide, you'll see that we approached this with kind of this three-prong approach and what I would call this hyper-local activity component. The first part was a Slow Streets campaign where we placed signage within the median of neighborhood streets or off to the side depending on the width of the street. And that was really kind of geared towards motorists to remind them that their neighbors were out and about walking and bicycling and they should be mindful of that and slow down. Then we had our Walk Local Bike Solo campaign, which started out as our annual Bike Month campaign, and we had to quickly kind of reinvent what that program would look like given the safer at home order. It became a virtual campaign where we encouraged people to walk within their neighborhoods, providing them walking maps, providing them virtual scavenger hunts. As the economy started to reopen and restaurants were allowed to offer takeout, we encouraged people to visit their local eatery, send us a picture of them with their to-go bag and their bicycle. And then there was a third component of the campaign where we modified our traffic signals throughout 10 major corridors, really geared at slowing down traffic. If we could go on to the next slide, please. And here you have a map of what our Slow Streets neighborhood program looks like. We ended up implementing the equivalent of 100 miles of Slow Streets, really targeting neighborhood streets. So placing those A-frames with the slow down signs at the entrance points of neighborhood streets, primarily coming off of major corridors, near freeway on and off ramps to remind people that they were entering a zone where people might be walking and bicycling. We purposely did not create a citywide network. And that was because we were encouraging, again, people to stay local. We wanted to be mindful of the purpose of the Safer at Home order. And so really encouraging people to stay within their neighborhoods as they walked about. If we could go on to the next slide. And so coupled with that was our traffic signal modifications, where you see here the 10 corridors or so that we implemented. And again, this was intended to slow traffic down. So in certain cases where they might have had green lights all the way through, we purposely modified the traffic timing to force a stop and slow them down. Next slide, please. So where we are now, our Walk Local Bike Solo campaign concluded in June. Again, it was part of our, what would have been our normal Bike Month campaign. Because it was virtual, we had some extra resources to extend the program through June. Our Slow Streets Neighborhood Protection campaign ended in July, but given the fact that the order is still in place, that schools will be, at least for the near term, in distance learning mode, we are in the process of rolling out what we're calling our Slow Streets 2.0 program, taking some lessons learned from our initial program. And then we also had some lawn signs distributed. There were a lot of people who wanted the A-frames within their residential streets where it wouldn't have been appropriate. So we launched a lawn sign in coordination with SCAG, or the Southern California Association of Governments, where we provided lawn signs to any resident who requested it. I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to hear the rest of the panelists and to receive your questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, Laura. Already just with the first two presentations, starting to see some of the similarities and differences and so many stealable ideas. I love the Walk Local Bike Solo slogan and campaign. That's fantastic. So next we're going to hear from Robin, our sole non-Californian on the panel. What do you want to share with us today?
Okay, so my name is Robin Lewis. I'm from Bend, Oregon, your neighbors to the north. And our program was really modeled after Oakland's. So you'll see some of the similarities there. And if we can show the next slide, I'll show you where Bend is in case you're not familiar. We're fairly isolated, smallish town, 35 square miles. And ours was started by an organization similar to your SVBA, in that we have a commute options, and it's a nonprofit, and it works on educating the state, does safe routes to school programs, and works with city councils and our DOTs as far as safe routes to school, better infrastructure, and better policies. So they were really the first initiator of this, and they worked with our city council to get them excited. And so once city council wanted it, I had a week to implement it. So it was really, really quick. Ours, as you'll see, was fairly hands-off once I got it off the ground. Next slide. So we were lucky in that we didn't have a lot of signage. So I had to keep it pretty small. We had 7 local traffic only signs. And we only had 2 speed 20 signs and 2 ped warning signs. So the other thing that we were able to use as our leaping off point was we had just completed a planned 34-mile slow streets, low stress streets network with our transportation system plan. And so that was a 2-year effort with the community. It was community-led effort. And it was an extensive public outreach process. And so we had this framework already in place. And the other thing Bend is blessed with is we have miles of trails that are either through parks or along canals, irrigation canal facilities, or along rivers. And so we were able to concentrate our network on getting people to those trailheads. And so we screened our network and looked for routes that would connect to the best trails to give people that extended outdoor rec space, because we started this in April and it was definitely led by the stay home orders from our governor. And we really, really wanted to be able to give people a place to get out. But then the other side of that equation was we want people to be able to meet their neighbors. We wanted them to experience and feel what it is like to have a slow street within their neighborhood while they were with their family, and kind of this captive audience to get them excited about this new program that we've planned, but they're not seeing much of on the street. And so we really wanted this opportunity to be able to like get them some teasers and get them also excited so that we can gain grassroots advocacy. So we ended up with 5 routes, and we created a website, some maps, and some yard signs. So next slide. We worked with volunteers within each route's neighborhood. As you can see from the next page, it's a map, but we needed, because it was just me as staff, we needed to be able to have eyes on the street that could help with the cones, make sure things were working okay and give me feedback. And so we pushed it out to our commute options again, but also we have a group called Bend Bikes that's an advocacy group. And they were able to send it out to all their email lists. We worked with our neighborhood associations to push it out to their email lists. And we got groups of volunteers within each route, and we rolled it out street by street with these volunteers and gave them some training and oriented them on the purpose. So next slide. It's just some pictures in the street. We used temporary traffic cones for traffic calming, did curb extensions and things like that. That picture in the upper right, we did move this sign back to the middle, and all our signs ended up being placed in the middle of the street because they were more effective there. But our cones, when we put our cones out, people loved them, but they tended to walk around a lot. And so it was a chase to get them back in their places. They were just very wiry and squirrely little cones that would leave, and we had to get them and corral them back. So we ended up pulling the cones about midway through. So now all we have are those little signs that say local traffic only. And we're going to keep ours up through October. We were really hoping to get kids back in school, but we also have a remote learning that's going to happen. So not quite as exciting. Next slide. So you can see our network. It also looks fairly dispersed, but we really wanted to get people to the trail system, and those brown lines are the trails. And we wanted to be able to open up those routes and give more distance to them so people could space apart and stay healthy in that way. But we also wanted people just to get out and get exercise. And we wanted this to be an opportunity to teach people that they could use certain streets to get to trailheads. Because a lot of times these trails, they don't know they exist. We don't have wayfinding signage yet. That's in our next phase of our implementation plan. And so people I'll talk to, and they're like, I've lived here 10 years. What do you mean there's a path behind my home? Like, they literally don't know, and it's a block from their house. And so these paths connect to great parks as well as commercial areas. So we really wanted to use this as that education tool. Next slide. And it's off to Jessica.
Right, thank you, Robin. And I think imitation is the highest form of flattery. So I'd be curious later to hear from the other panelists who else was inspired by Oakland. I know for me, that was when it first got on my policy radar, though I was not who generated this idea in my city. The council didn't, it was actually our staff. So now I want to kick it to Jessica Manzi from City of Redwood City to talk about our Slow Streets program.
Great, thank you, Giselle, and good morning, and thank you for having me. So as Giselle mentioned, I'm Jessica Manzi, and I'm the Transportation Manager for the City of Redwood City. I'd like to give you a brief geographic and demographic context of Redwood City. We're located halfway between San Jose and San Francisco, and Redwood City is very diverse, economically, ethnically, and even with our geography, which extends from the hills in the west to the bay in the east. This diversity very much informed our Slow Streets program. And in selecting streets for the program, we focused on neighborhoods of the highest need. Those are the highest density neighborhoods where residents are less likely to have private outdoor space, and in communities of concern, which have poor air quality, lower income residents, and those most likely to have poor health outcomes could benefit the most from having more space for physical activity. That said, everyone in our community can benefit from having more space for physical activity. So our program does have a geographic equity component where we have a slow street in most of our neighborhoods, which you can see illustrated in the network map. Next slide, please. So I don't want to repeat what you've heard from the other communities because there are a lot of similarities in our programs, but I just want to show these images which illustrate some of Redwood City's program components and our experiences. So like Bend, how we close the streets look very much like Oakland. And we found it to be a pretty effective approach where we were essentially blocking off one travel lane with a road closed through traffic, a traffic cone, and a pedestrian warning sign. How we communicate about the program is similar to the rest of the programs, which is a combination of social media and poster boards on the street. People in the neighborhood see the posters and learn about the program very quickly through that direct interaction. The only sort of downside of that is it tends not to engage necessarily drivers who are driving by. So you get the drivers will see the road closed sign, but they won't see the details in our program signs. Like Bend, we've relied on a small core of volunteers to be our eyes and our ears. Since signs and barricades do get damaged and moved, you see some of those pictures. We've had equipment walk away, and even some that fly. They've gone over fences at schools. Basically, people not supporting the program and getting them out of the way. But fortunately, so far we've been able to find all of the errant signs and get them back where they belong. But in spite of this, we've gotten very positive feedback on the program, requests for more slow streets, and hear heartwarming stories of neighbors building new relationships and children learning how to ride bikes, like Giselle's daughter on our slow streets. So I know that we're going to get into more details of our program during the discussion. So with that, I'll hand the control back to Giselle and look forward to the questions and discussion.
Thank you, everyone. And I wanted to, before we jump into the discussion, hear quickly from Shiloh. She had a couple of introductory remarks we didn't get to because we ended the last session and moved right into this one. So Shiloh, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thank you so much, Giselle. Really quickly, I just wanted to know, one of the main values of these events is networking. And so I wanted to assure you all, we are going to be breaking into small groups in between sessions so that you all can rub elbows virtually. I also wanted to mention at lunch, we're going to have a presentation about the 2020 Summit Award winners, and then place you in breakouts to replicate sitting at a lunch table. So we'll have some discussion questions there and facilitators to keep the conversation going. And we're also going to do that again at our virtual happy hour at the end of the day. Tomorrow we'll do it all again. And then also just please use social media. We've got hashtag SV Bike Summit, and each of our speakers have Twitter handles. Then you can tweet at them so that we can spread the word about how awesome biking is. Y'all are using the chat box for questions, so there you go. I don't need to prompt you at that. If you have any problems during the day, svbczoom@gmail.com is what you want to email. And then the last thing I wanted to say, SVBC staff are recognized by a background that you can see. So feel free to chat them in the chat box as well. Thank you, Giselle.
Thank you. You also have SVBC in your titles, right? So people could directly message you there.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. So let's chat. This is so fascinating. You can, as I mentioned, you see some of the similarities, some inspiration. This all happened incredibly fast. And when you think about government tends to move very slow. So let's talk a little bit about community outreach. what were the things what were the concerns you heard going in? Was speed a factor? How did you do community outreach? And any of the four of you, feel free to just jump right in. We're not going to be so formal as to raise hands.
So I'll go ahead and start. For our program, we actually didn't carry out any community outreach. We were hearing plenty from the residents about needing an outlet for recreation. We had initially kind of, as I mentioned, pushed off implementing slow streets. We were really encouraging people to use our existing trails and our Rose Bowl loop. And then that became an issue when those trails and the loop became overcrowded and people weren't socially distancing. So, and we had to close them. And at that point, we realized we needed to provide residents with an avenue for physical activity. So we had heard lots of support, and our program was really just launched based on the criteria we developed and implemented it. We continued to hear from residents throughout. The moment the barricades started getting picked up at the end of July, we heard from them again saying, where's this program going? And so our outreach, I would say, if you want to call it outreach, has been more iterative and being responsive to what we've heard from residents, what works, what's not working, even as we roll out our second version of the program.
Interesting. Anyone else want to answer that one? Talk a little bit if there was a stark contrast to that. If, had you already been hearing from your communities, or did you do any sort of formal outreach prior?
I'll follow that up.
Well, it'd be interesting to hear from you since your city was basically the first.
Yeah, we were early on, and we didn't do a lot of community outreach. As I said, it was a directive from the mayor's office before we started implementing the program. And we got a lot of flack for that. I think that that's something, if we could go back and do it again, I wish we had done some more community outreach before implementation. But we opened up a survey about the program pretty immediately after the program started. And I think one thing I just want to highlight was getting demographic data from respondents to the survey, because respondents generally felt really positively about the survey, but when we looked at like the zip codes where the respondents were coming from and things like their race and income, we're like, okay, I think it'd be easy to just say like, oh, everyone on the survey loves the program, but I think it really allowed us to see that there's a lot of people that we were missing in our communications. And then out of that, we started having weekly meetings with community leaders in different geographic areas like East Oakland or Chinatown, and different transportation advocate partners that we have to kind of deepen the communication between our city and the people that we realized we were missing in our standard communication. And we still have all of those. We have like at least 4 ongoing weekly meetings with different groups of community partners.
Great, so some lessons learned there. Jessica or Robin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add just something that was made perhaps unique to Redwood City is that although the program was initially rolled out really at the staff level and with minimal, if any, community outreach, after the initial rollout, we have quarterly meetings with the neighborhood association chairs, and I was able to do a presentation to that group talking about the program. And then going forward, it's been with the neighborhood association chairs that we've been discussing and making modifications to the streets included in the program and working on iterating going forward. So that's perhaps something that's a little bit different about our approach.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And in the comments, I'd seen Noelle answer a question about how this was seen as a basic need, right? Exercise and mental health, and right up there with food. And so it's a rare example in government of asking for forgiveness versus permission, and then having to do some of the fine tuning afterwards. It seems to be the theme. So I wanted to ask a question about equity because, coming off of the first session, Jessica, you did mention that was a big factor in the Redwood City program. We did look at areas of the city where people didn't have that access, where they had already been confined to their apartment, to their home, without a backyard, without walkable streets. And that was important. Anyone want to comment on how equity was a factor going in, or how you have perhaps augmented your program to factor it in now?
I can answer that for City of Bend. Staff had just gone through diversity, equity, inclusion training, and we had worked really hard through our transportation system plan to do pop-up meetings and meet people really where they were. We went to grocery stores, we went to libraries, we went to street corners, and we popped up with our transportation system plan or whatever plan we were working on, and brought the meeting to people, made it more convenient, easier, so they didn't have to, come downtown to a city council meeting or a fairly dry open house. So that really, really worked for us. And so that's why we went to the neighborhood associations directly. We tried to get neighborhoods that were diverse. And in Bend, we're fairly divided east side, west side. And we tried to have equity east, northeast, southeast, and then west. And that really, really is helping. And then our streets that we chose were either on the plan or scheduled for construction. So 2 of the routes are in construction right now to become permanent neighborhood greenways with traffic calming. And so this was a good kind of introduction, and it allowed that program, that funded CIP project, to have additional knowledge of who lived in that neighborhood, because we had these kind of pop-up open houses.
Interesting. Anyone else?
I'll add on to that. Thanks, Robin. Just thinking, I think when we first started implementing the slow streets corridors, we were thinking of equity in the same way geographically, like, oh, there should be slow streets near everyone, especially underserved communities. But I think we really missed the question of like asking people if this is really what they wanted. But I think that that's what's so great about like such a fast moving kind of pilot program like this, is that we were really able to engage some of those communities and hear from people like, oh, this isn't what you want, what do you want instead, and implement some of those improvements too. So I think that's kind of how our equity conversation has changed throughout the program.
So another question I heard coming through Noelle and Laura, your presentations, was this question of to connect or not to connect. Laura, I thought it was interesting that very intentionally you did not want to connect because you wanted this to be about solo recreating and not to encourage gathering. Did anyone else contemplate this or learn through their implementation that they had inadvertently created opportunities for gathering? Have you considered your designs from that lens and further street implementation through that lens?
I can start with that one. So at the staff level, we thought about that a lot, whether we wanted to have a continuous routes or to have them disjointed. And initially, we were just really concerned about facilitating these gatherings that were going to be detrimental to people's health. And so ultimately what we've seen in our experiences is that there haven't been these overcrowding situations. And so I think, if we get to the point of doing a 2.0, that we'd consider having a connected route. So particularly people that want to bike a longer distance can actually have a route that's continuous. But I think it's just one of those situations where we're iterating in response to a pandemic that nobody has experienced and don't know how the community is going to react to it. So I think that is one area for us to change, but is very much done in response to not wanting to create these hazardous or unsafe conditions for our residents.
Robin, did you want to add anything, Laura?
I'll just add that, we have heard from residents that they wish we had a cross-city connection and that it wasn't just neighborhood specific. Our challenge has always been balancing the need for people to have some physical activity and for emotional and mental well-being, and also balancing that with the purpose behind the Safer at Home order. And so especially initially when only essential trips were being encouraged. Again, we very purposefully did not have that regional connection with our slow streets. As we move on to the next version of that, we continue to be within operating under a safer at home order. And so we don't want to give the illusion that it's any safer to be out and about, and we want to still continue to encourage individuals to practice, kind of social distancing, wearing a face covering, but still allow them to be active and be out and about. I think for the time being, given that our trails are now open, that our Rose Bowl Loop is now open, we see that as an opportunity for people to have like these longer recreational opportunities. But again, with distance learning being what will be in the fall, and having children at home and parents or caregivers still at home, providing that safe local avenue, it continues to be our top priority over the regional connectivity.
That's great. Yeah, they really have different jobs. And it's interesting also to hear from Robin, connecting it to those existing routes, existing paths, or to the Rose Bowl Loop was part of the design in your cities. So it's just a couple more questions, then I want to look at our chat box. But one is, which I'm sure others are going to ask, so let's just get it out of the way now. Any plans for making these permanent or expanding them? I know one panelist threw out October as an end date. I think it's no different than a lot of our health orders. They have an end date and then they get pushed out and then they get pushed out. And I'm sure that's happened with a lot of you, but have there been any discussions at the policy or the staff level in your cities to say, hey, maybe this is something that has legs or wheels and we should keep?
I'll start off and say we're working on an interim findings report right now where we're going to make some recommendations for how we move forward. But right now we are switching out. So we've switched out our essential places cones with delineators, and we're planning on doing something similar with delineators and maybe planters for the existing slow streets, and going to keep them up through the end of shelter in place orders, which who knows how long that could be, but that's our commitment for now. And I think we're also going to pilot a kind of pop-up Oaklavia events kind of slow streets for like neighborhoods to apply and create their own slow streets using our cones and barricades for just like a day or a weekend or whatever. And then the other thing I think we heard was a lot of people requesting slow streets when they really wanted neighborhood level traffic calming. So I think another thing that we're trying to do more permanently out of this is really make a more robust neighborhood level traffic calming application and allow community members to apply for other kind of neighborhood level traffic calming treatments.
That's great. Anyone else looking at this for the long term?
Yeah, the City of Bend is working on creating an application process so that someone can create these in a fairly permanent, semi-permanent way using common materials. And we're trying to get that rolled out for the fall so that it could apply and be ready in the spring.
Great.
Yeah. And I'll just add,
Oh, go ahead.
same with the city of Pasadena, our next iteration, our Slow Streets 2.0, is intended to be a more sustainable version of the first one, where residents are going to be encouraged to adopt a slow street to kind of assist us with the maintenance and the day-to-day operations of how they're supposed to function. And I will simply say that given the popularity of the program, I think even once the order is lifted, it will be very difficult to have the program go away. So I think our next iteration will be referred to as a long-term temporary solution. But I do think at some point we will need to think about a longer-term, more permanent program, given the response that we've had, and the positive response we've had.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I was at our local bike shop a couple weeks ago, and the owner said to me, bikes are the new toilet paper. You can't find them anymore. which is a great thing. It's a problem we always wished we had, and now here we are with this remarkable opportunity. So it'll be interesting to see how we can shape it in the long term. So last question for our panelists, and then we'll get to some more of the chat questions, though I know many of you have been busy responding in chat, which is great. Any fun or memorable experiences in the process of this journey? Anything that you wanted to just share that really stood out to you?
I would say kind of similar to, I think it was Robin that mentioned how mobile these signs are, finding them in adjacent jurisdictions that don't have similar programs, how residents took it upon themselves to just, relocate them. And I would say that's probably been kind of where we have found some of these signs has been quite interesting.
Yeah, I think the most rewarding part was to have neighbors get word that they've met a new person that they didn't know lived around the corner. And they would see them walking the same street every evening, and their kids are the same age, and suddenly now there's a whole new connection made. Because I really think that's the grassroots effort that helps kids and parents allow their kids to walk to school, is when you know more and you have more eyes on the street that you trust. And so those connections are really important. So it's fun to hear them developing because of a program like this.
All right, well, we'll get into some questions from our chat. I will add, for me, having voted on the program, equity was really important lens for me. And probably the best email I've ever received in my service career was from a grandmother in one of our low-income neighborhoods who said her granddaughters had both learned to ride their bikes, and that wouldn't have been possible without the program because the streets were so narrow, were so crowded with cars, and there were just these tiny sidewalks. And so what a great testimonial to providing that equity, the health and the mental health and the physical health to our community. So with that, I think, well, it looks like we're already over. Shoot. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I thought we were ending at 11:15. Apparently I was wrong. Emma, is there any possibility that we cover some questions, or are we totally done? And is there a way that we can do follow-up for some of the additional questions that we have in chat that weren't covered?
Yeah, thanks. I think that we should probably get to our break since we missed the break the last time, but I think you guys all covered a lot of the questions in the chat, and thanks for responding in there, but we can also share those afterwards with the speakers and get those published for anything that was missed.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sorry I didn't end it sooner. Obviously was so consumed by these amazing women and their stories of leadership during this incredibly difficult time. So appreciate all that you're doing. And for everybody on the call, I hope that you learned something that you can take back to your cities. Thank you, SVBC, for hosting us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, SVBC.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So I think now we're going to go ahead and break into breakout rooms where you can do a little bit of networking.